The trick with the header is there are some weird formatting things that can get in the way, as I'm sure you noticed. If you automatically just double click in the header, it will give you a ½ inch from the very top of the page to where the header shows up. And that's the default you want to stick with. So don't change anything there. So here you have on the left, and I'll zoom in a little bit again, you have this, which only shows up on page 1, and then you have the paper title abbreviation, which is a shortened version of the title of your paper. And then if you tab over twice, you can insert the page number at the current position, and you'll just do a plain number, and then highlight everything, and of course you want it to be consistent with the rest of the paper, so you change it to Times New Roman, size 12. And when that happens, depending on the length of your paper title abbreviation, your formatting might get a little bit wacky. So then you can delete one of the tabs so that everything is on one line. And since I mentioned this is only on page 1, one of the problems that you can have, if you click different first page, then this entire header will just disappear. It automatically assumes that you don't want something on the first page. So what you do first is highlight this, copy it, so you can either do Control-C or you can go through the point-and-click menu to do that. Then click different first page. Then you can do Control-V to paste, and then you have your header again. But then you'll want to scroll down to page 2 and delete that running head section. And you might, again, have to put another tab back in depending on how long your paper title abbreviation is. So that's how you format the header. And if you have any questions with that formatting or with anything else, definitely just let me know, and I'd be happy to help you out. Moving on to the remaining activities from week 8. I mentioned I will talk about the online post here, but exam 2 I will discuss in the next week's slides. I thought you had great examples of getting messages that were either peripherally or centrally processed. One thing that I noticed a few of you didn't discuss was whether or not the messages were effective. So some of you, if you had answered all of the aspects of the questions, could have been eligible for full credit there. Moving on to the module introductions. Module 17 talks about mere presence. So mere presence means just being around other people, whether or not they're interacting with you. And they talk about the idea of social facilitation. And if you ever end up working in an office building, this image here is from Office Space, which talks all about working in an office building and in cubicles, chances are pretty good that you will work in a cubicle in close proximity to others. And you might be tempted even to knock down a cubicle wall or two so you don't feel quite so trapped. And this could be better for your work performance if you were skilled at your job. And you probably will be at some point, but beginning you might not be as good. Module 17 talks about the mere presence effect, which was originally called social facilitation, and still sometimes is. Researchers discovered that people performed a task better when others were around. So think about how you would do if you were computing simple mathematical operations like addition or subtraction, and there were other people in the same room with you. But then think about how you do if you were computing advanced linear algebra with an audience. Maybe not as good. The social facilitation effect didn't always work like people predicted. Sometimes people would actually perform worse with an audience. So while you're reading through Module 17, pay attention to the situations in which you might perform worse with an audience compared to better with an audience. There's a saying that many hands make light work, which is where they got the title for Module 18. It implies that if you have a lot of people working on something, it'll get done faster and more easily because each person's portion is smaller, their responsibility is smaller. And as those of you who have worked on group projects frequently in classes know, this isn't always the case. Social loafing is the phenomenon where a group member doesn't do their fair share. The book talks about things that are related to social loafing, including whether or not individual efforts are evaluated, whether or not group members feel evaluation apprehension, so whether they're worrying about being evaluated, and how much cognitive arousal that leads to. So are you thinking about or worried about other people evaluating you. So make a note of how these three factors contribute to social loafing or social facilitation. So on the top, I have different images that represent social loafing. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the old Lucille Ball skit where her and her friend were working on a factory line processing chocolate candies. And there were some other factors in that example that contributed to them not doing as good of a job, but you could also attribute it a little bit to social loafing, that she wasn't the only one working on that line. There's a song by Edgar Winter from the mid-1970s that talks about taking a free ride, and the book talks about free riding in groups. And on the bottom, you can see some images that represent social facilitation. So if somebody is evaluated, if they know they're going to be evaluated, if they're worried about it, and if that leads to some cognitive arousal, they might perform better. So you might see more of the social facilitation in that example. So Module 17 mentions how being surrounded by others can lead to social facilitation, but pay attention to page 203 here, where it talks about how being surrounded by people can influence either social facilitation or social loafing. Luckily, researchers have been able to identify characteristics of the task, whatever you're working on, and also of the group members or your relationship to those group members that can lead to less social loafing. So make sure you note those characteristics, and those can be found on page 205 and 206. Module 19 talks about how people behave differently or how they think differently when they're in groups. And they mention the idea of de-individuation, which can contribute to that kind of behavior. So whether you're in the midst of a riot, if you're storming the football field after a game win, or if you're sharing music or video files online, being part of a group can change people's behavior, which could lead them to do things that they would never do alone. This is shown in the Oscar-winning movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, which had a group of people in the KKK wearing masks, as you can see, representing that middle aspect of anonymity. And in real life, in last year's riots in Hong Kong, which were around the Lunar New Year. The textbook discusses three factors that can lead to greater de-individuation: group size, anonymity, and heightened arousal or distraction, which can contribute to this kind of behavior. But it happens here too. These photos are from the riots at ISU 3 years ago. Students broke the windows of a copywork store in Campus Town, and a student had to be life-flighted after sustaining injuries. They were rioting during the annual spring celebration called Visha, which represents the different colleges at Iowa State. And after this happened, the university president canceled the celebration that year and all years forward. And you may know students from ISU. You may have friends who go there. They likely would not have engaged in this type of behavior by themselves, but in a group, that can be a different story. Pay special attention to the suggestion on page 213 that can help reduce de-individuation. So this week, the different things that you will be doing. First, I would encourage you to go over feedback from Week 8 activities and from your project outlines. Read carefully through Modules 17, 18, and 19, and then compose online post number 8 by Sunday at midnight. And in online post 8, you will identify an experience that you've had where being around others influenced your performance on a task. And it could have either improved your performance or impaired your performance. So make sure that you explain which way that went and why you think it had that influence. And for full credit, make sure that you include some kind of connection to a concept in maybe Module 17 or Module 18, they talk about it in both of those, with your explanation. Then complete Quiz 7 by Sunday at midnight, and be working on your group project paper. So you have a few weeks to optionally submit a draft of your paper by April 3rd, and I can give you early feedback before you actually turn in the final project, final paper. So, the rest of this week, make sure that you are working on these things and have a happy St. Patrick's Day. That will be Friday. Do have fun, but remember who you are.